Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Premier Life Carmel podcast. I'm Dr. Mark. It's great to see you all today. Today, we're going to go over an interesting topic. It's the Arthrostim. It's one of the instruments that the doctors in our office have been specially trained to use. And there's a lot of confusion about this. People ask about it often as to what it is or how it works or even why it works. So in order to set up for that, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the importance of how our brain processes information. So we'll start by going back to the basics and how the brain processes information from our environment. So our nervous system prioritizes mapping our body in a 3D space. That's part of what our neurology is to do, is to help regulate every process in our body. So when that information gets disrupted, it will create a distortion in the way that our nervous system is able to send that information up into the brain, where all of that information is processed. And then once it's processed, it has to be sent back out. So what we do is we look at those areas in the body where we see these restrictions or these areas of interference or areas of stress within the body. And we realize that this is where those distortions can be built in. And once we have those distortions, our nervous system is no longer able to communicate properly with the brain. And the brain also is not able to send that information back out in a meaningful way. So these things all get distorted. And this distortion, once it gets in the brain, it actually rewires the brain process and the way the brain can even work. So if this information comes into the brain with that distorted pattern or that distress or any type of disruption, then what happens is the brain doesn't know what to do with that information. And not only that, but rather than stimulating a very specific part of our brain that deals with these individual processes, each one has a distinct area in the brain where it goes. The stimulation that even gets to the brain becomes much larger than normal. So the brain gets these very large hits of misinformation, and that causes a misfiring. And again, these patterns aren't just sort of like one and done. These things are learned patterns. Your brain learns to pick up on those distorted patterns. And even though it learns that pattern, it's not one that is able to then communicate properly. And there's where we start to see dysfunction and problems that typically will bring people into the office. So when the brain can't map things correctly, we get this persistent dysfunction. And even after, say, an area has healed itself, those dysfunctional neurological signals, they will continue to persist. So one of the things that we utilize in the office is this tool here. I'm going to bring it over for you. And this tool is the Arthrostim. So the interesting thing about the Arthrostim is most of the people in the office have had an opportunity to use this. So the thing that makes this unique as an adjusting tool is that the Arthrostim works on the same principle as the way the brain communicates with the nervous system. That is, it works on what's called a low beta somatomotor neuron wavelength. That's not important. What that means is that the brain communicates with the rest of the body and the rest of the body with the brain through a series of frequencies that are typically 12 to 14 pulses per second. That's called the low beta wave that we just talked about. The nice thing about using the Arthrostim specifically is that frequency that you hear is that low beta somato-neuro waveform. So we're able to use this to directly interface into the nervous system and into the brain, thereby resetting those abnormal or those distorted patterns. This basically restores the normal communication throughout the body. So what we say is this is a way that we can talk directly to the brain. So the Arthrostim is actually an adjusting tool that not only gives the mechanical input, but it actually creates a retraining or a re-education to teach the brain how to accept that normal beta waveform that allows the body to function and to heal and to do all its daily activities. So what's interesting is, the brain works on that, the nervous system works on that frequency. And so the interesting thing about beta waves is that if we have a situation where we're under stress, or we have a lot of things going on, or we've had an injury, or those toxins that tend to create these distortion patterns in our body and these strain patterns, the beta wave may actually increase, because there's also a thing called a high somatic beta wave. And when we get into that situation, even though it's still a beta wave form in our brain, that high waveform is not very conducive for us to be able to shift gears and get out of that sympathetic drive. In other words, what that high beta somatic waveform does is it puts us in a state of anxiety and anxiousness. And that can create a lot of strain in the body, because we don't feel like we can break that loop. And one of the ways we can do that is simply by introducing that low beta waveform from the arthrostim. Helps to reset that high beta wave to bring us down. So we don't want to get into the brain and do the things like change that beta waveform to something like an alpha or a theta wave, because that basically is what we do when we're getting ready for sleep. So we don't want to inhibit the brain's process. What we want to do is get into that low beta waveform, because that is where we do our best work. That's where we're able to focus on tasks. That's where we're able to have a good productive day. That is our alert center in our brain, is when we work at that low beta waveform. And so by putting this information into the body with the arthrostim, we're able to recalibrate or readjust the way the brain is working in those beta waves to actually take away those things that could create the more of an anxious or a poor attention type to tasks. So that's what that device is, and it's different than this. So a lot of people think it's a massage gun, and they'll say, "Hey, I have one of those at home. Can I just use that?" Well, I brought one of my own massage guns in just so you can see there's some similarity in the way these things look, but the principle and the application is totally different between a massage gun and the Arthrostim gun. The Arthrostim adjusting instrument is actually a neurological tool. It's a tool that we use to reset the neurology. Just as we said, we put that low beta waveform pulse frequency in, you get a very nice adjustment, you get that neurological reset. It tends to reconnect the computer center with the rest of our body, and things can travel better up and down. Something like a massage gun is much more for soft tissue injuries. The way that it moves is much different. It also has a pulse, but the pulse for this thing is much faster than the Arthrostim. It does not work in that beta waveform, so we don't get that same generalized distributed computer or brain reset input that we get when we use the Arthrostim for an adjustment. So the other thing that Arthrostim is good for is so many times when we see these dysfunctional patterns, and it does lead to issues within the body, we no longer have to resort to things like just putting drugs into the system. That's typically what we're kind of used to today, but drugs don't do anything to fix that computer. It doesn't do anything to reset or help to retrain or establish normal healing frequencies in the body. It basically just shuts it down. And when you shut that down and you just dampen the system's ability to even be aware that there's a problem, all you're doing is just driving this even deeper. So it really helps to limit the impact of what we would think of as traditional approach to treating dysfunction in the body. And in fact, it allows us to just rebuild and reestablish normal communication in the computer. So that's it. Now you know the language that the brain speaks to the rest of the body and vice versa. It's called that low beta somatoneuro frequency, 12 to 14 pulses per second. So we're able to talk directly to the brain, helps to reestablish normal 3D mapping for our body, and all those processes are able to function better. Everything from our immune response to our endocrine response to even just how we're feeling throughout the day. So hope that was helpful. Hope that cleared some things up. Look forward to seeing you guys in the office. And by the way, this week is our diaper drive. If you haven't heard about the diaper drive or you haven't invited someone in yet, just want to remind you that for a simple pack of diapers or even just some wipes, bring those in. full complimentary examination, including x-rays and any scans that are required. And it's just a good way to introduce people to this way of health and healing for the body. So thanks for your time. See you guys next time.